In the small town of Willow Creek, Pastor Elijah Morgan and his wife, Sister Naomi Morgan, were seen as the perfect Christian couple. Elijah was the head pastor at New Life Chapel, a respected and growing church known for its powerful worship and community outreach. Naomi led the women's ministry, organized weekly Bible studies, and volunteered at the local food pantry. Together, they were admired, prayed over, and praised by almost everyone in town. Elijah was tall, charming, and full of charisma. His sermons were passionate, and people often cried when he preached. Naomi was soft-spoken and kind. She always wore a smile and never had a bad word for anyone. People often said she was the backbone of the church, and many young women looked up to her. They had been married for 15 years. Everyone thought their marriage was blessed. They had no children, but Naomi always said they were waiting on the Lord's time. She believed in patience and prayer. Elijah would often mention her in his sermons, calling her his God-given jewel. But behind the scenes, cracks were forming in their holy union. Naomi's younger sister, Rachel, had moved in with them 3 months ago. Rachel was different from Naomi. She was loud, outgoing, and dressed in a way that raised eyebrows in church. Naomi had invited her to stay because Rachel had lost her job and was going through a rough breakup. Families should support each other, Naomi had said when some church members whispered concerns. Rachel started coming to church with them. At first, she sat quietly in the back row. But within weeks, she joined the choir and became very active in the youth group. She often stayed behind after service to help Elijah with planning and outreach events. People noticed, but no one said anything directly. After all, she was family. Naomi began to feel uneasy. She noticed the way Rachel and Elijah laughed together, the way they exchanged glances when they thought no one was looking. Elijah brushed off her concerns. "You're imagining things," he said with a gentle smile. "Rachel is just happy to be in church again." Naomi wanted to believe him. She told herself it was just the devil trying to stir jealousy. She prayed. She fasted. But her heart remained heavy. She started watching more closely. She noticed Rachel's perfume lingering in the living room late at night. She noticed how Elijah always locked his phone, something he never did before. Then one night, while Elijah was in the shower, Naomi heard his phone buzz. A message appeared on the screen. She didn't want to look, but her hands moved before her thoughts could stop them. The message was from Rachel. It said, "Last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about it. I wish Naomi didn't have to be in the picture." Naomi froze. Her world shattered in a second. Her hands trembled. Her face burned with betrayal. The man she had prayed for, fasted for, loved deeply, had been sleeping with her own sister. She put the phone down, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the wall. A tear slid down her cheek. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just sat there, as the sound of running water filled the room. The perfect marriage was a lie, and Naomi Morgan, the quiet, smiling pastor's wife, was about to make a decision that would shake the entire town of Willow Creek. Naomi did not sleep that night. She lay in bed with her back turned to Elijah as he came out of the shower, humming a gospel tune like nothing had happened. He climbed into bed beside her, placed a hand on her shoulder, and whispered, "You okay, baby?" She didn't move. "Just tired," she replied softly. But tired wasn't the right word. She was broken, torn, confused, betrayed. She wanted to scream, to ask him how he could do such a thing to her, and with her own sister. But instead, she lay there in silence, her eyes open, staring into the darkness. The next few days were difficult. Naomi watched Elijah and Rachel with new eyes. Every smile, every touch, every glance was now poison. She noticed how Elijah became more careful around her, how Rachel avoided her gaze. The two of them were trying to act normal, but Naomi saw through the act. She saw the guilt in Rachel's eyes and the fake cheerfulness in Elijah's voice. Naomi tried to keep her composure at church. She continued leading the women's Bible study, continued praying with the sick, and continued sitting on the front row every Sunday like a loyal pastor's wife. But inside, her heart was a storm. Her faith was shaking. She had always believed in forgiveness. But this felt unforgivable. One afternoon, Naomi visited her friend, Sister Claudine, a widowed elder who had known her since childhood. Claudine noticed something was wrong. "Your smile doesn't reach your eyes anymore," she said gently as they drank tea in her kitchen. Naomi looked down. "There's something I found out," she whispered. "Something that's eating me alive." Claudine placed her hand over Naomi's. "Talk to me, baby." Naomi hesitated. Then, with tears forming in her eyes, she spoke. "Elijah, he's been with Rachel. My own sister. I saw her message. I know it's true." Claudine's mouth dropped open. "Lord have mercy. I don't know what to do," Naomi continued. "I feel like my life is a lie. How could he betray me like this? How could she?" Claudine squeezed her hand. "You need to pray, Naomi. Ask God to guide you. Don't let your anger lead you to sin. But also, don't let anyone walk over you. Not even a man of God." That night, Naomi knelt by her bed and tried to pray. But all that came out was sobbing. Her hands shook. Her chest felt tight. Her faith, her marriage, her family, all were broken. Rachel came home late that evening, wearing tight jeans and smelling of Elijah's cologne. Naomi stood in the hallway as Rachel walked in. "Where have you been?" Naomi asked, her voice firm. Rachel froze. "Just out with the girls." She lied. Naomi stepped closer. "Don't lie to me, Rachel." Rachel's eyes dropped to the floor. She didn't speak. Naomi nodded slowly. "You should start packing." Rachel looked up. "Naomi, please." "You heard me," Naomi interrupted. "You're not welcome here anymore." Rachel opened her mouth to say something, but no words came. She turned and walked to the guest room. Naomi stood alone in the hallway, fists clenched. Her heart beat loudly in her chest. She felt betrayed, humiliated, and lost. But somewhere deep inside, something else had started to grow, something cold and dark. She looked at the family photo on the wall. It showed her, Elijah, and Rachel smiling at last year's church anniversary. Naomi stared at it for a long time, then took it down and smashed it on the floor. The days that followed were heavy with silence. Rachel moved out the next morning. She packed her things quickly, barely saying a word. Naomi didn't speak to her, not even a goodbye. Elijah came home later that day, acting like he didn't know anything had happened. "Where's Rachel?" he asked casually as he removed his tie. Naomi didn't look at him. "She left." Elijah paused. "Left? What?" Naomi finally turned to him, her eyes sharp. "Maybe you should ask yourself." He didn't respond. He stared at her, confused, but she could tell he knew what she meant. The mask was slipping. She could see the fear in his eyes. He was caught, and he knew it. Naomi didn't yell. She didn't scream. Instead, she began to change. Slowly, quietly, she stopped attending church events. She stopped cooking for him. She stopped smiling altogether. Elijah tried to act normal, but the tension in the house was thick. There were no more shared prayers. No more laughter. Just silence and suspicion. At church, people noticed Naomi's absence. Rumors began to spread. Some said she was sick. Others said she was on a spiritual retreat. Elijah told the congregation that Naomi needed rest and asked for prayers. But behind closed doors, their marriage was falling apart. One night, Naomi waited for Elijah to fall asleep. She tiptoed into his study and opened his desk drawer. Inside, she found his private journal. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Page after page, she saw confessions. Words he never dared say out loud. "I know what I'm doing is wrong, but I can't stop. Rachel makes me feel young again. Naomi deserves better, but I don't know how to face her. I feel trapped in a holy lie." Naomi shut the journal. Her heart pounded in her chest. It was no longer just an affair. It was a full betrayal of everything they built. The marriage, the ministry, the faith. That night, something inside her snapped. She went to the shed behind the house and unlocked the box where Elijah kept an old pistol. He had bought it years ago. For protection, he said. Naomi had never touched it before. But now, she held it in her hands. Cold metal. Heavy weight. She stared at it for a long time. Her breath was slow. Her thoughts were loud. The next morning, Elijah prepared for church. He stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie, humming an old worship song. Naomi watched him from the doorway. "Elijah," she said calmly. He turned, smiling. "Yes, love." She didn't answer. She looked at him, really looked, one last time. "You broke me," she whispered. Before Elijah could speak, she raised the gun. His eyes widened in shock. "Naomi, wait." A loud bang filled the room. Elijah dropped to the floor. The house fell silent again. But this time, it was a silence that would echo through all of Willow Creek. The gunshot echoed through the quiet morning air like thunder. Birds scattered from the trees behind the Morgan's house. A neighbor's dog began barking. Naomi stood frozen, the gun still in her hand. staring at Elijah's motionless body. Blood was already spreading across the floor, staining the cream-colored rug they had picked out together years ago at a church home fundraiser. His eyes were wide open, but lifeless. Her hand trembled. Her heart pounded, but her face was calm. No screaming, no panic, no tears. She placed the gun gently on the nightstand, knelt beside Elijah, and whispered, "I gave you everything, and you threw it away." Then she stood, walked slowly to the kitchen, and called 911. When the dispatcher answered, Naomi spoke in a low, clear voice. "My name is Naomi Morgan. I just shot my husband. Please send the police." There was a pause. Then the dispatcher said, "Ma'am, is anyone else hurt?" "No," she said. "Just him. He's gone." Naomi didn't try to run. She didn't try to lie. When the police arrived minutes later, they found her sitting quietly on the couch, hands folded in her lap. She stood as they entered. "The gun is upstairs," she said. The officers handcuffed her gently, almost with pity. Everyone in town knew Naomi. Everyone respected her. To see her in handcuffs, it didn't make sense. She had always been the gentle pastor's wife, the one who prayed for others, who visited the sick, who comforted the grieving. As they led her outside, a few neighbors stood on their porches, staring in disbelief. Mrs. Langston, from across the street, covered her mouth in shock. Mr. Darnell, the church treasurer, shook his head. At the station, Naomi was calm. She answered every question. She gave her full statement to the detective. "I found out he was sleeping with my sister. I saw the messages. I asked her to leave. He pretended nothing happened. He betrayed me, betrayed God, and used the church as a cover." The detective, a kind-faced man named Officer Wilcox, leaned forward. "Did you plan to kill him, Naomi?" She looked him in the eye. "No. I wanted to forgive him. I prayed I could. But the pain, it stayed. And this morning, when I saw him getting ready to go to church and preach like nothing happened, I couldn't take it anymore." News of the shooting spread quickly across Willow Creek. It was all anyone could talk about. The radio station covered it. The church group chats were filled with shock and confusion. Some blamed Naomi. Others blamed Elijah. Many were simply speechless. Rachel, hearing the news from a friend, collapsed to the floor in her apartment. She didn't go to the police. She didn't try to defend herself. She just cried. At New Life Chapel, the doors were closed that Sunday for the first time in years. A note on the church entrance read, "Due to a family emergency, service is canceled. Please pray for the Morgan family." But everyone already knew. The pastor was dead. The pastor's wife had pulled the trigger. And Willow Creek would never be the same. Naomi's trial became the talk of not just Willow Creek, but neighboring towns as well. Reporters gathered outside the county courthouse. Some came from local news stations. Others were independent bloggers hungry for a dramatic story. The headline spread fast. "Pastor's wife shoots husband after alleged affair with her sister." Inside the courthouse, Naomi sat quietly beside her defense attorney, Mr. Roland Keyes, a calm, middle-aged man known for taking tough cases. Naomi wore a plain navy dress and kept her hands folded. Her face was pale but composed. She had not cried since the arrest. She refused to. The prosecution painted a clear picture. Naomi Morgan, respected pastor's wife, had snapped under the weight of jealousy and shame, choosing murder over divorce. "There were other ways to handle betrayal," said the prosecutor, "but she chose violence." But the defense had a different story. Mr. Keyes stood before the jury and said, "This is not just about a wife who found out about an affair. This is about emotional abuse, betrayal of sacred trust, and the slow unraveling of a woman's mind and heart." Naomi Morgan lived with a mask for years. She loved a man who lied, who cheated, and who used his pulpit to appear holy while breaking his vows. She is not a monster. She is human. The courtroom listened in silence as Naomi took the stand. She spoke softly but clearly. "I gave my life to that man. I followed him when he said God had called him to preach. I stood by him when we had nothing. I opened my heart, my home, even to my own sister. And he took advantage of that trust." "Did you plan to kill him?" her lawyer asked. Naomi looked down, then back up. "No, I just wanted him to stop lying. But when I saw him that morning, getting dressed to preach as if nothing happened, something in me broke." Gasps filled the courtroom when the prosecution brought Rachel to the stand. Rachel looked thinner, tired, and ashamed. She avoided eye contact with Naomi. "Yes," she admitted. "I had a relationship with Elijah. It started after I moved in. I didn't mean for it to happen. I didn't expect it. But it did. And I regret it more than anything. Did your sister know? The prosecutor asked. Rachel's voice cracked. She found out. And I left. I thought it would end there. But it didn't. Naomi's face remained still as her sister cried on the stand. No anger. No forgiveness either. Just silence. The town watched every moment of the trial. Some prayed for Naomi. Others called for justice. Many were torn. How could a woman so faithful, so soft-spoken, become a killer? By the third day, the courtroom was packed. Church members, former friends, curious strangers, all sat shoulder to shoulder, waiting to hear what the jury would decide. The judge, a stern woman named Judge Yvonne Briggs, instructed the jury to carefully consider everything: the confession, the motive, the circumstances. As the jury left to deliberate, Naomi sat back in her chair. She looked at the cross hanging on the wall behind the judge's bench. She whispered under her breath, God, I'm still yours. Even if I'm broken. The trial was coming to an end. But the truth, the pain, and the consequences were just beginning. The jury was gone for 7 long hours. Naomi waited quietly in her seat the entire time, eyes focused on nothing and everything at once. She heard the ticking of the courtroom clock. She heard the creak of the wooden benches. She even heard the quiet sobs of a woman in the back, maybe a former church member, maybe just a mother who saw herself in Naomi. But she didn't cry. She had no more tears to give. When the jury finally returned, the entire room stood still. Judge Yvonne Briggs looked over her glasses and nodded to the foreman. Has the jury reached a verdict? Yes, Your Honor, he replied, his voice tight. Naomi stood. Her lawyer stood. The courtroom held its breath. The foreman unfolded a piece of paper and read. In the case of the state versus Naomi Morgan, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty of voluntary manslaughter. Gasps filled the room. Some people looked shocked. Others just nodded silently. Not murder, but not innocent either. Judge Briggs turned to Naomi. Mrs. Morgan, the court has accepted the jury's decision. Due to the emotional circumstances surrounding the crime and your lack of prior offenses, sentencing will be determined after a full psychological review. Naomi nodded slowly. She didn't flinch. She didn't collapse. She simply whispered, Thank you. Later, as she was escorted out of the courtroom in handcuffs, she passed Rachel. They locked eyes for a brief second. Rachel's eyes were red and swollen. She opened her mouth as if to speak, to say sorry, or maybe something else. But Naomi turned away before any words could come. Outside, the town of Willow Creek buzzed with whispers and opinions. I knew something was wrong in that house. She was too quiet. That's the type you watch out for. Elijah had no right. He made his bed. Poor Naomi. She just snapped. Back at New Life Chapel, the church elders met in private. With Elijah gone and Naomi in custody, they didn't know what to do. Some wanted to close the church doors for good. Others wanted to hold a prayer service for healing. They eventually agreed to reopen for Sunday service. But this time, there would be no music, no sermon, no celebration. Just silence, prayer, and a community trying to understand how the people they trusted most had fallen so far. On the day of sentencing, Naomi stood again before the court. A psychiatrist had diagnosed her with severe emotional trauma and depressive grief disorder, triggered by betrayal and long-term psychological stress. Judge Briggs, firm but fair, looked at Naomi. You are not a danger to society, Mrs. Morgan, but a life was lost, a life you took. For that, you must face consequences. She was sentenced to 8 years in prison, with a chance of parole after 5. Some said it was too light. Others said it was too harsh. But for Naomi, it didn't matter. She accepted it. She had already lost everything. As she was led away, she whispered to her attorney, Tell the women at church to keep praying, not for me, but for each other. Naomi disappeared behind cold gray walls that day. But her story stayed behind in Willow Creek, a tale of love, betrayal, and a quiet soul who broke under the weight of too many lies. 5 years passed. Willow Creek moved on, but not without scars. The church, New Life Chapel, reopened under new leadership. The once packed pews were now half filled. Many left, unable to forget what had happened. Some stayed, clinging to faith despite the brokenness of those they once trusted. Rachel Morgan left town shortly after the trial. She changed her name, cut her hair, and moved to another state. No one heard from her again. Her betrayal had left a deep wound, not just in her sister's heart, but in the community that once welcomed her with open arms. Her picture was removed from the church choir wall, her name no longer mentioned in conversations. Elijah was buried in the church cemetery, beside a tree he once planted during a Men of God event. His tombstone read, Pastor Elijah Morgan, a shepherd called home. But many whispered at his grave, did he lead, or did he deceive? Some still visited. Others passed by without stopping. The truth about his double life had tainted his legacy. The man once praised for his faith and leadership was now remembered for something far more human: weakness, lies, and betrayal. And Naomi? Naomi Morgan was released on parole 5 years later. She had been a model inmate, quiet, respectful, always reading, always praying. In prison, she led a small Bible study for women. She never spoke much about what happened. When other inmates asked her why she was there, she would say, because I broke. And now I'm learning how to heal. When she returned to Willow Creek, it was not with fanfare. There were no signs, no greetings. She didn't expect any. She moved into a small apartment on the edge of town, alone. The church offered to help her, but she politely declined. God and I are still talking, she said with a gentle smile. But not in buildings for now. One Sunday morning, Naomi walked past New Life Chapel. The doors were open. Soft music drifted out. A new pastor, younger and full of hope, was preaching about forgiveness. Naomi paused, closed her eyes, and whispered, I hope they mean it. She didn't go inside. Instead, she walked to the town cemetery, placed a single white lily on Elijah's grave, and knelt down. I loved you, she whispered. Even when you hurt me, I loved you. A tear rolled down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. She stood up, looked at the sky, and breathed deeply. For the first time in years, the air didn't feel heavy. She was free, not just from prison, but from the pain that had once controlled her. The story of Naomi Morgan, Elijah, and Rachel became a legend in Willow Creek, told in quiet voices at dinner tables, in Sunday school lessons, and whispered during prayer meetings. Some called it a tragedy, others called it justice, but Naomi called it a warning. Because even in the house of God, secrets can live, and sometimes they don't stay hidden.